What is up, my fellow conspirator and conspirators? It is, of course, I, none other than your boy, the man, the myth, the beast of Bay Street, Matty Milligan. And this, of course, is the underground marketing conspiracy. Woo! I decided to keep that even though it's now November. And today we're going to be talking about how to think like a CEO. And this is different from being an entrepreneur. So I'll tell you where I got this idea. You may have noticed that I didn't record or release an episode for a few days. And the reason why is that I was actually up north and we did get stuck up north in Quebec on the border of Ontario and Quebec in a small town called Temiskaming. I was there for a few days and I went there to escape, which I do from time to time to do a lot of thinking and really just escape the noise of the city. Because living in a town like Toronto where it gets busier and busier and busier and there's more and more construction, planes flying by, cars driving by, people moving into the city, more jobs and opportunities opening up every single day. There's times when, I'm not gonna lie, it does get to me and it does get under my skin. And one of the best ways that I like to get ideas and really just figure out my next steps and really get in touch with who I am is to escape into nature. And the place where I stayed for several days is basically a cabin on a little lake, and there's no road access, so you have to take a boat to get there. But what happened is I had a wedding to go to on November 1st for a good friend of mine. And I feel bad because we essentially tried at first I tried to take a bus there on Halloween early in the morning, and the water was so choppy that we had to wait. And then finally, by the time I arrived at this bus stop to take this bus back from Temiskaming to North Bay back to Toronto, we missed it. So there was a huge storm coming in too. So there was snow coming into this area and freezing rain, and they're like, oh, it's going to be about 15 to 20 centimeters of snow and freezing rain. So I had to make the split-second decision if I was going to stay in town or stay up there for a few more days and just relax. And I didn't really have anything over the next few days other than that wedding, so I was like, okay, what am I going to do? So I decided to just go back to my buddy's place and stay there instead. And even then, I'm like, oh, maybe in the morning it'll be fine to go. And he's like, yeah, it's possible. And the thing is, even if I had stayed in town, they closed the highway, so there was no access. That bus was completely shut down. So basically at that point, I made the right decision because I wasn't getting out of there for a couple of days. And sure enough, overnight, it snowed a lot. There was freezing rain, very sketchy. But during that time, I always have my notebook with me, and I don't really watch that much TV. I just escape technology for the most part, and I come up with a lot of good ideas. And I've heard this from a lot of CEOs where they do something similar, and even in the book Think and Grow Rich, he talks about this, where he's like, from time to time, you'll have to just disconnect from everything and really just re-immerse yourself into nature. And getting ideas from nature for me is a very powerful thing. It's where I find a lot of inspiration. And when you just cut out, first of all the pressure and noise from the city and other people, that's really where you get a lot of ideas, right? And then the people is the second thing I was trying to say there, is that when you disconnect yourself from the influence of other people, you really get in tune with yourself and what you want. And that's when a lot of ideas really start to flow. And I go up and I'll start reading some books up there. Like I brought up Cash Advertising, which is a copywriting book. I plowed through that. And then my friend had these books on the Arctic. And we watched a couple of Arctic movies and outdoor movies because I think it's fun to just watch some movies at night, and then we would listen to podcasts. But I was reading this one story about this guy, and I forget his name. I think it was his original North American name was William Stevenson, but then he changed it to like Wilhelm Stephenson, like a more of a Swedish name, even though he was, I believe, a Canadian gentleman. And he was an explorer where he explored a lot of the Arctic. And I just found it absolutely fascinating. It's a pure Burton book called Prisoners of the North. I just found this part fascinating. And I've read a lot about this other, what's it called, the Franklin expedition before, where a lot of these explorers, they went up north, but the Franklin expedition was two ships. It was the Erasmus and the Terror. And there's this show called The Terror, if you've seen it on AMC, and it's basically just an exaggerated, hyperbolic version with fantasy involved. But these two ships got stuck and then they got stranded. But I got this one big idea out of that where I'm like, and listening to a podcast as well. And it was just this idea where this guy was talking about this guy, Matt something, I don't remember his name. It was on this podcast called Biohackers Lab, and he's talking about his diet is called the light diet, and he's talking about all sorts of different things, and the diet itself is, he talks a lot about how when people first start getting into fitness, they start working out, whether it's lifting weights or doing cardio, and they get some results from that, and they'll feel okay, and they'll look good, but then you realize at some point that'll only get you to the certain amount of results. So the next step from there is really altering your diet, whether that's doing a plant-based or vegan diet, whether that's doing the carnivore diet or a keto or Paleolithic diet, or whether that's taking supplements. Really just changing your diet is going to get you that next level. But he talks about another level, right, which is really kind of like that biohacking level where human beings, we're not getting enough sunlight, so that's one thing. We're not exposing ourselves to the cold enough. So that's another thing. We basically just stuck in this kind of homeostasis from time to time, and we're not getting too hot or too cold. So we kind of stay stuck there, and that leads to a lot of illnesses where if we're exposed to cold and we're exposed to those hot temperatures, we wouldn't be victims of a lot of these illnesses. And it's good for those two things, getting sunlight as well as exposing yourself to cold specifically, because you really re-energize your mitochondria. And from there, I was like, oh my God. And I wrote down multiple different ideas as well for like biohacking things that I could eventually create. And for me, during this thinking time, it made me really realize, like, one of my personal long-term goals I've had for a long time is really just to go completely off the grid for about a year or so, maybe even 2 years, and really just reconnect and rewild myself. And I don't have any kids. I don't have a mortgage. I do have to take care of my mom, who's bipolar and who also has diabetes, which is a whole other story, but that's really the only responsibility I have. And I don't have any dogs, so for me, doing that at this point in my life, I do have the freedom and I do have the resources in terms of financial resources to actually go out and do that. So I may potentially do that at one point. And I just feel that the city too, you're exposed to so much blue light, which is why I wear these silly glasses, and we're exposed to all sorts of these electromagnetic frequencies that you see, like whether it's 5G, 4G, LTE, Bluetooth. All of these things really have an adverse effect on us. And when I was up there, I was super relaxed. And then when I got back, I noticed it right away, just getting back into the city. But the main thing that really helped me was we started going into the cold water up there. And I don't know what it was. Like, I've tried every single diet out there. I've tried all sorts of workouts. A few years ago in 2015, I was in like really good shape, like super jacked arms, and I still have a lot of that muscle left over, but I got super jacked by eating well and working out. But I still didn't feel like optimal at that point. And I feel there's been a while when I haven't really had that mojo, and people come to me like, dude, you're so confident, like you're so good at camera. And I'm like, wow, thank you. Like, you have no idea how much work I have put into developing myself and finding my voice and improving my public speaking. So I take that as a massive compliment, first of all. So thank you for saying that. But even from there, I just didn't, I feel at some point in like 2015-ish, I kind of lost my mojo, and I don't know what it was. Like, I didn't feel like kind of that alphaness that I've felt in the past. And I don't know, it kind of affected me, and it didn't really give me that certainty stepping into certain situations. And that's definitely affected me in my business life, in some of my relationships in my life. So it was something where I'm like, okay, this cold water, my buddy's like, dude, you got to go in. Like, it's the best thing. And he'd been doing it for a while because he's been up there for a few weeks, and he's been doing it almost every day. And he's like, dude, once you go in, like, you're going to freeze. So I went in the first time, and I lasted for maybe 10, 15 seconds. And one of the things, main mistakes I've done is I've tried to take cold showers before, and I always go in and I'm like tensing up. It's like, oh my gosh, and you're trying to like not shiver, and you're resisting it in your head. But I don't know, I just realized like you have to embrace it. So the first time I kind of freaked out. The second time I went in, I lasted 30 seconds, I think. Then day 3, I lasted 60 seconds. And then I started doing these 5-minute sessions. And the day it snowed up there, we went out into the ice, and sure enough, there I am, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do this, and my buddy had just done it for about 5 or 6 minutes as well, and I go in there, I get in, I was able to just, I didn't feel that cold, I didn't have that resistance, and by the time I got in, I just started breathing, and it's funny because you see all these different breathing exercises out there, and I don't know if they actually work as well as just getting in the cold water. Like when you're really cold and you start shivering, you can't resist the cold, first of all, right? Like you just have to kind of accept it and start shivering. But I don't know, you just figure out how to breathe naturally. And when you get out, oh man, like you're cold for maybe a minute or so, but the fact that you've kind of lowered your threshold for pain, right? And you've exposed yourself to a little bit of pain, it makes all the other stuff a lot easier. And it's weird because after that, I didn't really feel anxiety at all. And then when I got back into the city for the first couple of days, I was fine. And then I've had anxiety like today and maybe a little bit of yesterday just about some things. And I'm just like, oh man, I'm getting back in. So I think long term, I would like to create some sort of like product out of this, right? It needs to be different from what's out there with all the other biohacking and cold shower stuff like the Wim Hof method, which is one thing we also listen to a little bit. But I just feel that there hasn't really been some product yet that really like encompasses the different levels, right? Like the effect of light on us for one thing, the fact that we wear clothing all the time and we didn't really evolve doing that. So I think out of this, it really gave me like a big idea because I've had some other ideas recently. I've been thinking of creating like a cycling funnel. I'm thinking of creating this weird like Freemason funnel because I found a bunch of groups to target as well. And there's been a bunch of things where I'm like, all right, what's one thing where I could do that? And out of this, I just had this idea where I'm like, man, like I could go up there, I could buy a piece of land, I could just live off it for a while, maybe even a small cabin, buy one if there's one in place, or heck, build one myself, record everything, and then just put that out there as content for people. And then from there, I don't know, give away some like free PDF thing and go through the different things and then sell a course, sell a retreat where people would actually come to that place and I walk them through everything hand by hand and I help them like network and really just keep them accountable long term as well in some sort of group. So from doing that though, from just going up to nature, you really get these ideas and disconnecting from technology. And it's weird because the last few days I've just been like, I've been really reticent to like do anything in terms of just work, even though yesterday I worked really hard and it was just a super, super busy day yesterday. And there was like the entire day I just couldn't get that idea out of my head. And I've just been doing more research, being like, all right, like, and then this leads to that. And what would the offer stack look like? But I think as a CEO, right, when you want to get those big ideas for your business, you really just have to like escape everything, right? Escape society, escape your family, go somewhere, do something different, changing your environment, right? And it's weird because Tony Robbins talks a lot about changing your physiology and like moving. And it's weird because I went to Funnel Hacking Live in 2018 and I'm like, oh man, I'm seeing Tony Robbins. Like finally, it's been one of my things. And it just wasn't that great, right? Like I couldn't find partners to do the exercises with, first of all, which stunk. So I'm already like, oh man, like this isn't going well. Like I want to have that breakthrough, like that people always have. And it's like, I don't want to go to one of his events and walk on fire. Like that's not going to do it. But one of the things that he always talks about is changing your physiology. And man, that cold water, like nothing changes your physiology like that. Even right now, it's probably 4 or 5 degrees outside and I don't have any heating on. I have the windows open and I'm in a t-shirt and I'm fine. And I actually feel really hot right now. And it's probably like 68, 70, 69, 70 degrees Celsius, something like, or Fahrenheit. And I feel absolutely fine right now, which is weird. I usually feel cold and I don't know. I just have this big idea, I think, for this new product that I really want to look into. And for me, it's like, do I stop doing all my copywriting and building funnels for other people and a little bit of design work? Like, do I stop doing that or do I just create this one thing? And I think that's ultimately what I want to do. Like, I want to just build my own funnels off of that. But at the same time, I really want to keep this podcast going because I have a few guests on. Like, I have this one consultant coming on in late November, Tim Conley, who's absolutely awesome, coming on, one of the highest paid consultants, as well as just one of the best advice givers I've ever seen, and just has ideas that I've never heard of myself, and very like ultra creative, super smart, super intelligent guy that actually gives you high level advice, not generic advice that you see from gurus and out there and other experts. So, but that's one thing, right? And even you need to really set aside the time though as a CEO where you're just doing that thinking, right? You might have heard too that 50 CEOs read on average one book per week per year, about 50 per year. But in a lot of cases, they're just getting someone else to read the book and then just feeding them the ideas because they don't have time to read it all themselves, right? But what CEOs do is they set aside thinking time or puttering time, right? An hour or two a day where they can just sit there and think, or sit there and read and just jot down ideas and really just work things out in their head on the next steps, right? Visualizing and having that vision of what they ultimately would create. But for me, like, I was in that water when I came up with that idea where I'm like, all right, this is what I want to do. Because Toronto is so noisy. Like, that was the main thing coming back here. I'm like, wow, like, the noise is just so intrusive. As I've talked about previously, noise is the most intrusive to all the senses. You can close your eyes, you can close your mouth, you can close your nose, you can try not to feel stuff, but you can put on clothing to warm up, you can take some off to cool down, but sound, it's like you try and plug your ears and you can still hear that because it's frequency, it's vibration. So going out into nature, you just go into that silence and these ideas just like kind of come to you. It's very strange. The first day you'll probably have that like detox where you're like, oh man, I need to check my phone. And believe it or not, I had a day or two where I didn't look at my phone. I know that sounds insane, and I've talked to people who are like, oh, I can't do it without my phone. And I don't know. I'm all about reliance and self-reliance rather, and not buying into technology completely. And I have a certain paranoia for technology, but at the same time, I like to use it and really just have that kind of interdependent relationship where I rely on it a little bit and it relies on me. But I don't know. Eventually, I think like maybe even in the spring, I just buy like a little bit of land, maybe just a small house up there, a small cabin, live off the land, and just like record myself doing stuff and just upload it, right? And I don't know, there's a lot of weird stuff I think that I do in terms of like biohacking and just stuff health-wise, and just a lot of views that I have that are different that I don't really share necessarily on this podcast. And I've talked about my other show that I want to create, Day-to-Day Hustle too, right? And that's something where I'm like, oh, it's going to be like a motivation thing and it's going to be more hardcore. But I'm like, man, like I think Day-to-Day Hustle should be a vlog where it's like shows me going from working in my full-time job, which I shot videos for a few years ago, and now they're private on my YouTube channel, which in the future I'll release. And it kind of shows me in my day job, and then me transitioning to working from home, to working for myself, ultimately to kind of me parting from society, and kind of documenting that whole process along the way. And for a lot of people, they're like, wow, like you're gonna just leave society. It's like, no, like I still need to depend a little bit on society for some things, right? But I don't know, this place up there, it's just had a charm that I hadn't seen before, and it just was just, I don't know, I just felt very relaxed in that the times when I did have to kind of talk to someone, I didn't really mind as much. And I don't know, I just feel like I was talking about before, like a few years ago I lost my mojo. Like I feel that fifth or sixth time that I got in the water, like it was back. Like I felt so invigorated, and I'm gonna keep that. And I'm trying to figure out a way to actually get colder in Toronto. Like I've tried to do cold showers and those are okay, but even right now I'm looking at people out of the window, and I was walking around before in my sweatshirt and I felt super hot, and they're in like parkas out there. Like these people in Toronto are in like Canada Goose jackets right now, and it's like 5 to 10 degrees. Yesterday there was a point when it was 12 degrees and I see people like shivering and they're in their Canada Goose jacket, and I'm like, how are you cold? Like there's clearly something wrong here. So I think this big idea for me, it's like something, I have a lot of things ideas that are really happening in my mind. I'm trying to figure out a way for it all to go together, and which is why I have my notebook where I can just jot everything down. But I think, again, to think like a CEO, you have to kind of escape from everything, right? Escape from your business, get that like bird's eye view where you're not, again, biggest cliche and trope where it's like, oh, you're not working in your business, you need to be working on your business. That's something where it's like, all right, let me look at my business from a big vantage point where I'm not involved in any way, and just think about the next steps to take it to the next level. And sure, I'm sure I could build a huge business based on copywriting, and I'll never have to worry about that. And I could even just, again, if worst case, I would go back into sales if everything were to fail, which it wouldn't. But I like to focus on building one business at a while. So sure, I'm going to be doing this copywriting thing, but I'm kind of working on that secondary thing that allows me to, again, get that freedom, which for me would just be to kind of escape on my own into live in the wilderness. And a lot of people will be like, what we do in the winter? It's like, dude, I'd have a cabin, I'd have a little wooden stove, and then I'd cook food and live off the land basically. And like maybe I'll have a little small farm with a few animals, and I'd be concerned obviously about the bears and the wolves up there and any other sort of like eagles trying to probably kill the chickens as well, or hawks rather. But I think that's ultimately what I want to do, like with my life. And maybe sure, I'll have my own small place here in Toronto for when I need to really come in and talk to some people and meet with family and friends from time to time. But I think my ultimate plan is to really like go and just rewild myself and be with nature and really just escape all of that noise, right? Like the sound, but also just the frequencies that you can hear every day, and more so that you can't hear, right? Like all those sounds that you can't hear but are still going there. And I've been doing a lot of research too on 5G technology, and it does make me a little bit paranoid, to be honest. So I'm hoping that they don't fully introduce it at this point. So that's really my 2 cents on thinking like a CEO. And if you do have any other questions, feel free to let me know. If you're listening to this on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you are listening to this to, consider leaving me a review and consider subscribing as well, so you can kind of document my journey so that I give you and show you some of the funnels that I'm building. And I have some ideas as well on some things. I was thinking of creating a Twitch show where either I build funnels with people or I go through funnels that I've bought stuff through, where I've saved the links for all their pages and I go through the pages and it's like, hey, here's what their ads look like, here's what they do, here's the thinking and rationale between why they're offering this and why that offer works and why this is all in place. And I think that would be really effective for people. So that's kind of one of my plans as well. But in the meantime, again, consider subscribing, considering going back and maybe listening to a few other episodes that I've released recently. And I will see you next time on the Underground Marketing Conspiracy. Woo!